Good day, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your webinar on thesis and dissertation writing. Particularly, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Sani Maglente, who extended this invitation in behalf of Masbate Colleges. So once again, I am Mr. Leonilo B. Capulso. I am the president and the CEO of Beyond Books Publication. So for today, I will be sharing with you how to write the second chapter of your thesis and dissertation, particularly on writing your review of literature. So allow me to share my screen. Okay, so once again, I'll be sharing with you how to write the review of literature and studies as part of the second chapter of your thesis and dissertation following your institutional format. Research, we all know, is very critical for the current and future generations' growth and development. Particularly this time of COVID-19, research played a very significant role, not only in the academe, but basically in all aspects of our daily existence. No, in business, in industry, in the medical field. But of course, the focus of this webinar is to see the significance of doing research in the academe, particularly for you guys who will become leaders of education. Progress is very elusive without quality research that contributes to advancing the new frontiers of uh, of knowledge and thinking and adapting to current education. So it is said that a country's competitiveness is best measured through research. So the number of research conducted by a particular institution will surely determine the competitiveness of the school, of the college, of the university. So that is according to the author cited in this study. But before we go further, let's try to have a common understanding, at least a common definition of research. So according to Clark and Clark, research is a careful, systematic, and objective investigation conducted to obtain valid facts, draw conclusions, and establish principles regarding an identifiable problem in some field of knowledge. So we know well that in the first chapter of your writing, your research, your thesis and dissertation, you were able to identify already a particular topic you want to focus on. And basically, this has been uh, based on the gap that you identified. For my share, I'll be sharing with you on the second chapter, and the format of the institution would follow foreign literature, followed by foreign local literature, foreign studies, local studies, the synthesis, and the gap bridge by the present study. So, what is a literature review? Okay, why do we need to conduct literature review? Okay, so a literature review is basically a survey of scholarly sources on a specific topic. That is why when you start drafting your research proposal, okay, before you were able to have your title, you started with the topic. Why? Because your title could still change even towards the last part of your study. What is important is you have a particular topic you want to focus on, you want to dwell on, and studying uh, studies conducted to your topic is very important later on as we move along. So literature review provides an overview of current knowledge which allows to identify relevant theories, methods, and gaps in the existing research. So if you could recall on your format, the last part of the literature review or the chapter 2 is trying to identify the gap being responded to by your study. But for you to identify the gaps, you must be able first to know, to ascertain what are the current studies conducted related to the topic you would like to study. Okay, that also includes theories, okay, formulated and methods conducted that might also give you later on an idea, okay, on what is that particular gap being responded to by your study. But what's the difference between literature and study? So by this time, you must be very familiar. But for the purposes of discussion, when we speak of related literature, okay, it pertains to books and other written works, especially those considered to have creative or artistic merit or lasting value. And again, it's supposed to be connected to the topic you have chosen. That is why it says related literature. On the other hand, related studies pertains to researches or studies published or not, again, which is also connected to the study or to the topic at hand. So that's basically the difference between uh, review of related literature and the related studies. Okay. So foreign literatures and foreign studies are basically published or conducted outside the country, where our local studies are the ones printed or conducted in the Philippines. So why do we do literature review at the first place? It says that um, your literature review starts after you identify the topic. That is why it's very essential that as educational leaders, as researchers, it must be very clear to you what is that particular topic you would like to study. When I'm handling practical research subjects in senior high school, I would normally ask my students, okay, research is basically aimed at answering a particular problem. Okay. So that particular problem that you want to answer to or address to is actually within, okay, a particular topic. For you who are also connected with the basic education, wherein you are encouraged to conduct action research or applied research, your study could actually be among the four important themes in basic education, like teaching and learning, child protection, governance, so on and so forth. Okay, so literature review is basically there to accomplish several purposes. So maraming kadahilanan o um, intention why we do literature review. One, it shares with the reader the results of other studies related to the present study. If I will be the one to read your dissertation or your thesis, going through your literature review would tell me what are other studies conducted related to yours. Okay, what are the findings or results and conclusions that actually drawn from the studies of other researchers connected to your topic. Okay. Um, the literature review also relates the study to the larger ongoing dialogue in the literature, filling the gaps and extending prior studies. So again, here we reiterate the importance of identifying the gaps that would actually give importance to the study you have conducted. We know well that you're not the first one who conducted a study on a particular topic. There had been previous research or previous studies conducted on this topic. However, there are certain elements that maybe they weren't able to tackle, and now you could actually fill that gap. Okay, so also your study would add up to the literature on a particular topic. For example, there has been studies conducted on productivity on higher education, but there are actually very scarce or very limited studies on productivity on basic education. So personally, that's actually gives me the gap of conducting my own dissertation on research productivity framework on basic education. Why? Because I realized there had been a lot of research productivity mechanism in higher education. Research culture in higher education institutions are actually very uh, productive, very responsive to the demands of the times. But there is that scarcity in basic education, so that inspires me to continue the study I started to when during my proposal stage. Also, the literature review provides the framework for establishing the importance of the study. So your study would actually try to establish that relation to the previous studies conducted. It will also benchmark for comparing results with other findings. um that is why towards the latter part in your review of related literature, when you do your synthesis and analysis, you either do two things: either you agree with the previous study, or you would like to contradict with the previous study and present your own study, or it could have been your study is actually supporting previous studies. However, there is something new with your study that is not actually part of the element of the previous study. So this is also a way of benchmarking for comparing results with other findings. Okay. Um, According to Cooper in 2010, there are four important types of literature review. Okay. So according to Cooper, there is a literature review which integrates what others have done and said. So the purpose of this kind of literature review is only to integrate. To integrate means to make a whole. So you are it's more of sharing your cup of tea to what already has been done. However, there is some important element or ingredients or indicator or variable that you would like to add. Another type of literature review could also be the one that criticize previous scholarly works. Okay. There could have been knowledge before that um, may not be actually true today. That is why there are always innovations in the field of education and even in other fields of study. So the purpose of your literature review is to prove that the previous, for example, the previous study is no longer relevant because of the change in time. Okay, so that's the second type of literature review. So to criticize. So the first one is to integrate. The second one is to criticize. Okay, so you're trying to disprove, for example, a theory or a study previously conducted. The third is to build bridges between related topics. So yours is only to connect. Okay, so that means to say you are trying to to use your own study to fill that gap between the previous study and the present study. Okay, so among related topics. Fourth is identify. Okay, identify central issues in a field. Okay, so what does it mean? um it could also mean that there could have been studies conducted already, but you would like to point out the central issue that is being addressed by this particular study. So identifying the central issues in the field, trying to find the common denominator. Okay. Now, by this time, let's try to, okay, following your own format. No, earlier it was presented to you, okay, the sequence of doing the literature review, okay, from foreign literature to foreign to local literature, foreign studies, local studies, synthesis, and filling the gaps. Creswell, one of the renowned researchers both in quantitative and qualitative study, he actually gave us at least the basic steps in conducting literature review, may it be quantitative or qualitative. Although Criswell would sometimes recommend that the placement of the literature review, may it be at the first or the last, is sometimes dictated by the kind of design we are using. So he's saying that if, for example, if you're doing qualitative research, particularly grounded theory, you don't start with the literature review. Okay, you start with the experiences that you gathered from the field, and then after that you try to draw your themes, and only when you have that, that's only the time you have to employ the literature review. Okay, there in that case the literature review will either contradict or affirm the themes that you were able to draw out of the experiences of your participants. But generally, these are the steps that a researcher like you need to undergo in conducting your literature review. Okay, let's start. So number one, identifying keywords. Okay, so in other words, based from from the topic you have chosen, you were able to identify important words, okay, word or words that might help you, okay, later on in trying to review literature. So these keywords are useful in locating materials in academic library at a college or a university. In your case, in Masbate colleges. But because of COVID-19, we know well that we try to maximize online databases. So it doesn't matter as long as you have the keywords to search or to use to look for these important literatures and sources that you need. So it says that keywords may emerge in identifying the topic or may result from preliminary readings. So we normally do that. Um, we can only write much if we read much. So what we actually will search in the database or in the library, those keywords are actually connected to the topic we have chosen. So we must be able to identify first what are the important keywords related to our topic. Okay. Next, number two, of course, after you have identified the important keywords that you have listed, you try to go to the library. Okay. Now that the Commission on Higher Education is actually giving the go signal for all courses to go face to face more or less by December, you could already maximize your school library or even go to the National Library and other libraries for that matter. But of course, it will not stop you from using your computers, okay? Computers at home or internet, searching for catalogs for holdings. And this may be in a form of journals and books. So in other words, if you have these catalogs or search engines, it's easier for you to search the literature related to your topic if you already identify what are the important keywords you would like to search in the internet or in the library. So as researchers, you could use databases focusing on journal and books on chosen topic, common open sources, and even other search engines used by researchers are uh, ERIC or Educational Research Resources Information Center. This is very common, or EBSC or EBSCO host, PsycInfo, SocialLife, the Social Science Citation Index, Google Scholar, ProQuest, so on and so forth. In other words, there are a lot of databases, and most of them are uh, open online sources that we can use if we want to to develop our literature review. But let me give you one typical example, which is also very helpful for starters, and that is Google Scholar. Okay, if you can see here, this is the link. Okay, just if, for those who are not yet familiar, but I suppose you know this already. Okay, what makes Google Scholar different from the ordinary Google? Okay, so with this link, okay, you will actually come to this search engine. Okay, dito sa Google Scholar. All you have to do here is to type in the words that the keywords you have identified earlier, and Google Scholar actually will provide you books, journals, and with both local and international literatures. That is why Google Scholar also have its parameters. Okay, you could actually adjust the number of years that for in the search engine. Okay, look at this for example. Okay, so here, if you are looking at the screen to at the left, you have to choose which literature you what time frame you want to search. So if you click since 2021, that means to say Google Scholar will only present all literatures from 2021 up to the present. Okay, from January maybe up to the present. Or you could actually custom range. Okay, this one, meaning you could say, for example, from 2015 to 2021. So Google Scholar would present all this data that you need. Also, you could actually have this parameter if you want to include the patents or include citations. Now, what is another thing, what is good with Google Scholar? For example, you already type in your keywords, the following literature will come out. But another useful thing about Google Scholar, if you could see this quotation, this close quotation mark. Okay, for example, you like this article. If you try to click this quotation mark, Google Scholar will provide you already the citation. Okay, based on what you are using. For example, uh, if you're using the Harvard Citation Index, like for example, in law school, we are using the Blue Book of Harvard. So it has its own way of citation. But most of us, social science and other researchers, would normally use the American Psychological Association or EPA version 7. So automatic, it's already there. All you have to do is to copy paste this one, okay? And then put it right away to your bibliography or references, okay? So that's one thing good uh with Google Scholar. And when I was doing my dissertation, actually, another way of looking for other related literature, if you try, for example, to open determinants of research productivity, because that's actually connected to my dissertation. If you open that, you go to the last page of that study, you will find related studies actually connected to that topic. So you are just trying to put some links and connections. So it will not be harder for you anymore to look for other studies because you just go to the references of related studies, and it will provide you actually with other literature that you will be needing. Okay, the third step, according to Creswell, is uh, you could start with 50 reports or literatures. When I was starting my literature review, I was reminded that since I am doing a dissertation for my PhD, I need at least 100 literature. But as I go along, you didn't realize that you're actually going more than what is expected. So, Personally, in my case, I was able to gather more than 200 literatures on the related topic. And for example, in my case, my dissertation is about research productivity. I was able to identify four important keywords based from my previous reading, like individual characteristic, institutional characteristic, self-efficacy, okay, and leadership characteristics. So this in connection to research. So these are the topics I search, and initially I read. Okay, I started maybe with I think I started with 20 uh, journals or articles, and another 20 until I was able to reach more than 200 literature. But take note that a review of related literature is not only a plain identification of the literature. It's not a narration of literature. That is why the last part of your literature is very important, the synthesis and the analysis of your study. Okay? The fourth important step is trying to skim the initial group of articles and chapters, duplicate those that are central to your topic. This is what I was saying earlier. So based from that initial articles that you gathered, you could actually disregard those which are not so much related, but those journals or articles which are related to your topic, you could actually duplicate them. I said one way of doing that is you try to go to the references, and you would realize that there are actually other studies connected to that study you are presently reading. But of course, you have your time frame, meaning you identify based on the year they are published if they are still related or not. Then throughout the process, simply try to obtain a sense whether the article or chapter will make useful contribution to your understanding of the literature. This is what I'm saying. Since it's clear for you already which literature are essential, those readings or those articles which do you think have less important value in your study, you could actually discard them already. Okay. Number 5, begin designing a literature map. After you have read already the some important literature, okay, by then you must be able to identify already the important variables that you are looking for. In my case, I was able to identify four important variables. So from that four important variables, you could actually make a literature map. There are different ways on doing the map. In other words, trying to summarize the literature you have gathered. For example, if you have 100 or 200 literatures, how will you put them together? Creswell is actually suggesting to try to make a literature map. Okay, so what is a literature map? Okay, so a literature map is a two-dimensional diagrammatic representation of information where links are made between concepts by drawing arrows. So you could use arrows to connect. Later on, I'll be showing you. Okay, which could be annotated to define the nature of this link. So could write there at the side, how is this literature connected to this? Okay. Okay, develop your understanding of the key issues and research findings in literature. For example, look at this. I crafted this from the book of Creswell. So, for example, so this is employees' concerns about the fairness of and the making of management direction decisions. So this is your main idea. So these are your indicators or your variables. So justice perception formation. So with this topic, what literature you got? So you have motives by Tyler, you have knowledge by Scape, so on and so forth. So all this literature, so ano bang mga to? These are actually keywords, okay, connected to justice perception connection. So keywords, the author and the year. Under justice effects, you have outcomes, and you have the author's year and the year of publication, trust, organizational support, okay, organizational citizenship behavior, unjust treatment, need to study. Okay? So the keywords, the author, and the year. The same thing with this. So looking at this, you already have an idea and the summary uh, of your literature. Okay, so that's what it means by uh, literature map. Although you could make another one, no. Um, when I was writing my dissertation, I was asked to simply instead of um, instead of map, no, the simple way of doing it is, for example, you have your index card with you. Okay, you could actually make 3 columns of your index card. First, you could write the keyword, okay, and then you write the synthesis of that article. Okay, you could actually start paraphrasing, wherein when you started to paraphrase this keyword, you could actually put that straight to your manuscript already without the fear of being accused of plagiarism. Okay, and of course you have to identify also, you have to put also there your sources, the author, okay, the digital object identifier or the DOI or the website, okay, or the URL. Number 6 is begin to drop summaries of the most relevant articles. So after you have your map, you could now start drafting the summary. Okay, you in my way of doing that is you could actually make a story para na siyang kwento. So gagawan mo siya ng kwento, parang storyline, no, if you're a script writer. After identifying important elements that you want to be part of the story, okay, you now try to make connections. Okay, so if you have, for example, 100 literature, you should put together already literature which are connected to and very potential to create the story. Okay, so include precise references to the literature using appropriate guide, such as the Publication Manual of American Psychological Association. Kanina na-integrate na natin ito doon sa Google Scholar. But it is during this time that's why I said it's very important. Okay, that's one thing na maganda kay Google Scholar, because you already have your citation there and I know it is already updated. Okay, so that you have a complete reference to use at the end of the proposal or study. Now, otherwise, I find this in the internet. Okay, you could also try this one. I think this is free, although there is a premium account for this. So this is citationmachine.net bar APA. Okay, if you type this in the internet, okay, ito yung lalabas niyan. Ang But if you try to scroll down, okay, if you try to scroll down, there are actually examples on how to cite an article, how to cite a website, how to cite an article with 2 or 3 authors, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's why it's called citation generator. It could actually give you free access, although there is, I said, a premium one for this. So there are other actually applications in the internet that will help you, okay, in trying to um to review literature, particularly in using citation generator. Number 7, assemble the literature review. Okay, structuring it thematically or organizing it by important concepts. Okay, so how do we put them together? According to Creswell, it could be uh, thematic, okay, or according to important concepts. Later on, I'll be showing you another way of putting that. So end your literature review with summary of the major themes. So for example, yung 200 na literature, okay, na nabasa mo, how will you group them together? In my case kasi, what I did was I summarize my literature based on my indicator. For example, uh, individual characteristics in research, leadership characteristic in research. So I actually used that first one, the thematic one. Okay. Okay, and it says at this point, you could also advance critique of the past literature and point out deficiencies in it and issues in its method. Aside from trying to put your literature together, you could actually remember I said that after you try to review the literature, you also try to synthesize. That means you have to group, and of course, you have to analyze. You have to to explain. You have to discuss how is your study different from the study of others, or how is the study of A becomes obsolete by the study of B. Okay, so that's what it means by um, structuring thematically. Okay. Another author said that these are the approaches in organizing our literature review, as mentioned, no, chronological, as the word would say, chronos means time, okay, sequence. So this is the simplest approach, which is to trace the development of the topic over time. So dito, all you have to do is with your topic, you just try to show to provide how the topic develops, okay, over time. However, if you choose this strategy, be careful to avoid simply listing and summarizing sources in order. So sabi nga, you don't just write down. For example, 200 din yung ilagay mo. No, there could have been actually, for example, out of 20 articles, 5 are actually saying the same thing. So you could put them together, just cite the authors who mentioned this point. So try to analyze patterns, turning points, and key debates that shape the direction of the field. Give your interpretation on how and why certain developments occurred. So you have to identify that how the topic develops, okay, from the oldest to the newest one. Another approach is thematic approach, and this is what I used during my dissertation. So I try to group my literature according to my variables. Okay, so as I mentioned, I have individual characteristics. What are the individual characteristics of a researcher to become a productive researcher? Okay, so if you have found some recurring central themes, you can organize your literature review into subsections that address different aspects of the topic. Okay, so you could actually follow that. For example, if you are reviewing literature about inequalities in migrant health outcomes, key themes might include healthcare policy, language barriers, cultural attitudes, legal status, and economic access. For example, at this time you are studying homeschool collaboration. That's your topic. So what could be the possible theme? The role of parents, di ba? The role of LGU, the role of school leaders and administrators. So that's how you put your literature together, okay, according to themes. Methodological, ano naman to? Okay, if you draw your sources from different disciplines or fields that use a variety of research method, okay, variety of research method. So that means to say, research A uses X, researcher B uses Y. Okay? Resources C uses Z. Ayan. You might want to compare the results and conclusions that emerge from different approaches. Okay, so you could see if what is the, for example, the mean of A, of B, of C. Look at what results have emerged in qualitative versus quantitative research. And this is very applicable again to me. My dissertation actually used concurrent triangulation method. So what I did was I first tried to identify the theme and standard deviation, but particularly on the grand mean of my quantitative against the theme and categories of my qualitative research. So using joint display analysis, I was able to identify some themes are actually connected where others are not. So those which are not connected, I did not include already because they are actually outliers. So discuss how the topic has been approached by empirical versus theoretical scholarship. Divide literature. You can also divide it into sociological, historical, and cultural sources. So you have your methods of putting your literature together. And of course, theoretical. What is theoretical literature review? It is a review, okay, which is often the foundation of theoretical framework. So this is where you are drawing your theoretical framework. You can use it to discuss various theories, models, and definition of key concepts. You might also argue for the relevance of specific theoretical approach. So why is this theory very important, or why is not important anymore? And combine versus theoretical concepts to create framework for your research. Okay. So in my study, for example, there were indicators which are actually available with other study, but I try to provide mine particularly on the enhancement of the previous indicators. Okay. Now, these are actually the last part of my sharing. Okay. So when we are writing our literature, may it be in the foreign literature and local studies, or in foreign uh in the first part, on the second part, take note of the following. According to our source, okay, when writing our review, use evidence. Okay, do not, as much as possible, na we are encouraged to do paraphrasing to avoid plagiarism, but it doesn't mean that we don't need anymore to cite the source. Okay, so as a literature review section, just like other academic research paper, so your interpretation of the available sources must be backed up with evidence. That is why we always cite. Okay, if we are not prohibited to do verbatim citation, but it should not be more than 40 words, and there are actually uh, practical way to do it in actual writing. Okay, but to be sure, always recognize the source in writing your literature, and you could cite them using APA format. Okay, next. Okay, be selective. In other words, select only the most important points in its source to highlight in the review. You need not to write everything in your literature review. Okay, the type of information you choose to mention should you relate directly to the research problem. In other words, all your the literature that you mentioned are connected to the problem we are trying to address. Whether our way of doing the literature review is thematic, methodological, or chronological. Related items that provide additional information but are not key to understanding the research problem can be included in the list further reading. So kung hindi talaga na siya kailangan, if you realize there are other studies that they actually allocated a portion in their study which says for further readings. In other words, if you want to know more about this topic, you can do it yourself by reading those indicated sources. And as much as possible, the author suggests, our source suggests, that you have to use quotes sparingly, hindi naman palagi. Some short quotes are okay if you want to emphasize a point. For example, in my case, when I was trying to identify the important role of LGU and parents, or basically I am introducing a tripartite collaboration, the quote that I would normally cite is an African saying which says, it takes a village to educate a child. Okay, what I'm trying to emphasize there, that it's not always the responsibility of the teachers to educate children. Parents now, particularly during this time of COVID-19, are also important, and much more that the local government and non-government organizations. Sometimes you need to quote certain terminology that was coined by the author, not common knowledge, or taken directly from the study. Okay, do not use extensive quotes. Huwag naman na puro na lang quotation as a substitute for your own summary and interpretation of the literature. You could actually use the quotes to start, for example, an argument or a paragraph or to end one. Okay? Then, summarize and synthesize. Ito yung pinakamahalaga in the format of Masbate colleges. It is actually towards the last part. Okay? When you try to summarize, we mentioned that you could do this by thematic analysis or by putting them as a group, those that speaks the same thing, okay? Or you could actually do it historical, okay? And another way of groupings. But not only that, you also try to synthesize. When you synthesize, you identify if this literature actually are in the same line with what you are thinking, or you are trying to introduce another one. Okay? So remember to summarize and synthesize your sources with each thematic paragraph as well as throughout the review. Okay, recapitulate. Okay, important features of research study, but then synthesize it by rephrasing the study significant and relating to your own work. People would always look at this in your study. Okay, what is your own contribution to the literature? Okay, since there could have been a lot of studies already conducted in your field. Next, keep your own voice, meaning while the literature review presents other ideas, your voice should remain front and center. That means to say, okay, that in all those paragraphs, as much as you want to cite those important authors, the readers or even the panel could always see your voice there. Okay, so you have to weave references to each other resources into what you are writing, but maintain your own voice by, okay, this is the suggestion of our source, starting and ending the paragraph with your own ideas and wordings. So as much as possible, in the first part of your literature, it's very obvious that it's coming from you. That's your personal stand, and you can actually end the same by your own personal stand. Also, use caution when paraphrasing, meaning when paraphrasing a source which is not your own, be sure to represent the author's information. Dapat tama, okay, or opinions accurately and in your own words. So you can use it in your own words, but as much as possible, you try to capture the important message of the author, okay, and paraphrase them and cite the author just the same. Even when paraphrasing an author's work, you still must provide a citation to the work. Now, these are the common mistakes to avoid. Okay, I think this will be the last points. If you are writing our literature, we should avoid the following. Number one, sources in literature review do not relate clearly to the research problem. So kapag walang kinalaman yung iyong literature doon sa iyong statement of the problem, then that's nonsense. Why? Because you are only reviewing studies connected to your topic, which might even answer your questions identified in the statement of the problem. Next, okay, do not take sufficient time to define and identify the most relevant sources to use in literature related to research studies. Okay. You could actually find other ways of doing it. Okay. Do not overdwell. Third, when you rely exclusively in secondary analytical sources. What are secondary analytical sources? When an author would use a particular article which was quoted by the author himself. So that becomes now a secondary source. So normally what is suggested is for you to look for the original source and then cite the original author rather than including relevant primary sources, studies, or data. Next, uncritically accepts another researcher's findings and interpretation as valid. So when you are reading the studies of others, particularly unpublished research and dissertation, do not accept them as at its face value. Okay, you have to assess if they are actually valid, or you could even contradict to the results of these researchers. Do not describe the search procedures that were used in identifying the literature. So when you do not do this, okay, sometimes that could be misleading. So it is our task also to be very transparent on how did we go through with our study, even in data collection, of course, without disclosing the personality of our participants. Reports isolated statistical results rather than synthesizing them in chi-squared or meta-analytical methods. What is the meaning of this? Simply shows that sometimes as authors we only present results which are actually good to hear, but we try to hide other results, like in statistics, for example, by subjecting your data into chi-square, you could actually identify a higher and more clearer data as to what caused, for example, the significant difference or significant relationship. Another mistake is when you only include research that validates assumptions but do not consider contrary findings and alternative interpretation found in the literature. Okay? And I think that's the end of our sharing. So once again, thank you very much for allowing me to share the importance of reviewing literature. So we have to realize that, okay, uh in doing our literature review, we see to it that it actually connected to the topic we are studying. Towards the latter part, for example, even when you started already drafting your discussion, you still can use your literature. Okay, that would actually support your discussion and your results. So for this opportunity, I would like to thank you for sparing your time listening to me, and for some clarification, you could actually course through to Dr. Sani Maglente or message me in my email. Okay, Beyond Books Publication 2018 at Yahoo or at gmail.com. So once again, thank you very much for allowing me to share with you this time in your webinar for thesis and dissertation writing. So good day, everyone.